Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. Thank you all so much for joining us for this session on prompt education. No big surprises on why we named it PromptED. Had to go with the conference theme. So today we're going to talk about some generative AI use cases, specifically towards marketing and reporting. I am Raja Venkata, Director of Client Services at Cadmium, and I'm joined by an esteemed panel which will introduce themselves. Danielle.
Sure. My name is Danielle Milbauer. I'm the Senior Director of Continuing Medical Education at NYU Grossman School of Medicine, both the Manhattan and Long Island campuses.
Wonderful.
Hi.
Anne?
Thank you, Raja. Hi, everyone. I'm Anne Perch, and I am the Director for Continuing Professional Education at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas.
Wonderful. All right. So for the next 50 minutes-ish, we'll try to dab a little bit into some specific use cases in CME and CPD where we thought generative AI could be of use. So before I get started, I do want to acknowledge one of my colleagues, Andrew Dodson, who's from UNC. He was unable to join this because he's getting married. Congratulations to him. Let's all send our good vibes to him. He couldn't join this presentation, but he had a good amount of input in the marketing section of the presentation. So just want to acknowledge. Thank you, Andrew, and I hope you're having a wonderful time wherever you're celebrating. Disclosures, we do not have any specific affiliations. All the tools we're going to talk about are tools that we use for our specific use cases. We do not have any affiliations, nor are we selling services related to whatever tools we are talking about. All right, so for this meeting, we are going to talk about a little bit of introduction about generative AI, hardly a new term for most of us who are on this conference. We'll talk a little bit about generative AI, then we'll jump right into the meat of the presentation, where we'll talk about some interesting use cases for marketing and some use cases for some outcomes and executive reports. First and foremost, just to kind of level set, as all of you know, generative AI is an algorithm or a process where you can prompt in information and to a specific tool. The tool is going to help you generate code, images, different kinds of simulations, videos, whatnot, robots maybe down the lane, who knows, different kinds of things, all with a series of prompts. So that's our focus for today. And through the next two sections, we will talk about some specific use cases of generative AI. So let's start off with marketing and course design. And to kind of kick us off, I want to turn it over to Danielle, who'll walk us through a little bit about the background, and then we'll jump into some prompting.
Sure. Thank you, Raja. So as I mentioned, my name is Danielle, and I'm the Senior Director of Continuing Medical Education at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. And I've been in CME for a little over 13 years. As we all know, much has changed in the last 13 years, yet marketing has really remained extremely important to the success of all of our conferences. It's just that the medium that we're doing so in has changed quite a bit. So at NYU, we're considered an extra large program, according to the ACCME. So we run over 250 RSSs, about 85 live conferences, and around 20 enduring materials each year. And we manage the logistics for the majority of our live conferences. And that's done so all with a team of 11 split between our two different sites. So at NYU, most of our large conferences are open to external audiences, and we charge a fee to attend them. So getting the word out is crucial to the success of all of these conferences from both a financial and an attendance perspective. And that really looks like very different than it did 13 years ago. I'm not sure how many of you have been around since the time when we used to print out our course materials. At NYU, we would print these huge, like spiral-bound books with printouts of slides. And sometimes at the end, we'd add a few pages to the end advertising our upcoming courses. Every single conference that we ran, we produced and mailed a brochure. And that's not to say that we've eliminated print at NYU altogether, because we haven't. But simply to say that things have really shifted so drastically over the past decade or so. And now, we're here designing social media assets and trying to find ways to organically push our content to the right audiences. And I'm not sure about all of you, but for us, this can be really challenging. We have one person who's managing marketing, and she also has a variety of other additional responsibilities. And then for us, because we are part of a major medical school and a medical center, there's also all of these approval processes and branding guidelines and restrictions on the usages of social media that we need to manage. And all of this is done so, in a world where competition has grown and where a course was once regional, that's now hybrid. That does mean we're targeting a much broader audience in terms of our outreach, but it also means more competition. So how do we go about gaining the attention of learners nationally without ending up in their spam? And how do we show up at the top of a search engine, if we're searching for rheumatology CME rather than 2 pages down? So these are the challenges that we at NYU have faced. As all of you know, marketing is a vast initiative. It doesn't begin or end in the examples I described, but we can't boil the ocean, but we may be able to tackle a few of the common challenges in a new way. So now I'll hand it back to Raja to speak to you a bit more about how we could potentially use generative AI in marketing.
Thanks, Danielle. Oh, I love those paper books and brochures. Wonderful. Thank you again for that overview. And I think before we get into these examples, I think a key area that I thought was super interesting is there's no an end to the marketing effort. You could do as just a few things as you want to as much as you want. The focus here is whether you have 13 people or 1 person or 0.25 staff allocated for marketing, we all could do things in a more efficient manner. And so the goal behind this first use case is whatever is your resource, whatever resources you have access to, hopefully some of these might give you ideas on how to build more efficiencies in the process and really how to cut down waste and how to be lean in your CPD operations. So primarily we will focus on 3 use cases. We'll talk a little bit about SEO and a few examples related to that. Then we'll talk about course design and then designing email campaigns. I wish we could look at a lot more examples. I do understand we have a finite time and you all have business to take care of in the evening. So just to be respectful, we just started off with a few use cases in marketing. So again, quick review about the lay of the land here with SEO research. Most of us are aware of the importance of SEO. The use of the right terminology, the right kind of content is easily one of the most important things that are going to draw attendance to your CME or CPD activity. And of course, you want to have great content, but you also want to use the right words that your learners are likely going to use. So needless to say, it is a critical tool for audience generation. So let's look at just a basic example. And as I'm going through these examples, we really encourage you to share your feedback. If you have questions, you're welcome to type it in the chat. If you do have experiences as to how you used it, experiences or lessons learned, no experience is bad, in my opinion. Everything is a learning experience. So if you have used these already and you have feedback to share to your peers and us, we'd love to hear that. So feel free to please jump in with your feedback. Okay, so we start off with a very basic use case with SEO research, which is finding out the top 10 keywords on a course topic. So taking one step back, as you're planning your CPD activity or CME activity, the usual sequence of steps would be you would try to come up with some kind of content, then you're going to run it by what's more popular, maybe go through a couple of revisions to make your content solid from an SEO perspective. Here, what we did is we took one of those operational tasks. So what I'm doing here is I am trying to get the top 10 keywords on opioid management topic. So I've used that. I went through a series of prompts on ChatGPT. I have a paid version of ChatGPT. But if you're using Claude or Gemini, the framework would still be somewhat similar, because with any generative AI tool, there are certain set of things that are going to be repeatable. So here what I did is I said, act as an SEO expert. And then I prompted saying, search the 10 CME provider website on this topic and present the following. Rather than just giving me the keywords, I also wanted to understand what data that particular system is indexing. So I also asked it to give me the top 10 SEO keywords and the top 10 websites that were used to arrive at this list. Because I just wanted to do almost like a gut check, if you will, just to see that the format is aligning with what I would typically consider as, SEO-rich websites. So I started off with that, and I got a list of some keywords. We tried to redact it for the sake of brevity, and I've highlighted some of the key ones that I see from the prompt. So if you analyze this prompt output here, which is on the right side, you're seeing a series of keywords specifically that are used for courses on management of opioid disorder. And if you go through the list here, you might see an interesting combination of the words that came out of it. The first one, unsurprisingly, is opioid use disorder. Nothing earth-shattering there. I would expect to see that. But I think there are a couple of different words that I thought were interesting. Safe prescribing, addiction medicine, and opioid therapy. I thought a few of these words may not be things that I might usually think about when I'm creating my landing page content, but given these are popular, I may go back and reconsider my copy by adding some of these words, if they're logically aligning with my content. Now, there are a couple of other words that are pretty unique to your activity. So the last one, I'm not going to pretend to pronounce it well. It is a tongue twister. So that particular one is about a very specific training on a specific drug. Now, chances are that if I'm planning a CME activity that has nothing to do with that particular training, I'm not going to add the keyword just so that it pops up on the Google results. And that is an important takeaway whenever you're using a generative AI output. You are unlikely going to get the perfect output that you can literally copy paste into your use case. Highly unlikely. But what you're probably going to get is somewhere in between, a combination of something that you might really already be aware of and something that is totally inapplicable, and your actual meat is probably somewhere in between. And that is what I'd say the zone of generative AI. The zone of generative AI is being mindful of the extremities and trying to avoid the extremities. Trying to adopt everything that it says is obviously not a catalog for success, but discarding everything is also probably not going to get you the best out of the Gen AI tool. So I always think of generative AI output as enthusiastic, but still cautiously optimistic. So I always think about just using a few words or take some things from that output, which otherwise I would have spent several hours getting to that point. And then the second section of the output gives me a little bit of information about some of the websites that are being used. And some of these names hopefully should be familiar, especially the one right here is unsurprisingly on the list. And it's just reassuring to see we have at least a reputable database from which the generative AI tool is testing. So my key takeaways from this slide is whenever you're generating an generative AI prompt, give a role so that the tool knows exactly what area to focus on or what toolkits it needs to extract from its own programming. In this case, I said, act as an SEO expert, and then be specific about how you would like to give instructions. In the next few examples, we'll get into a little bit deeper about how you give instructions, how you prompt the tool. But here, another interesting thing is I said just the top 10 provider websites. I was very specific about what I wanted to search. And then I was specific about how I want the output to be listed. I want the top 10 keywords. And for my own fact checking, I want the top 10 CME websites. So if I were to break it down, assigning a role, making it very specific about what it needs to do, and then giving it very specific output directions are the three things that I took care of when I came up with this prompt. I had to go through a few iterations, but you might have a different variation as well. As I said, please keep the feedback coming. If you had better experiences or better prompt that gave you richer output, we'd love to hear and learn, because we are all in this together. We are learning it as well as we're speaking. All right, so basic example, we'll move on to the next one. The second one is more toward designing HTML for your landing pages. Now, this particular example, depending on what software platform you're using, whether it's for your LMS or for your association systems or for your hospital systems, sometimes your tools may have some of these baked into your platform. But the premise behind showing you this example is you could actually use generative AI for generating basic pieces of coding. Now, we are not getting into a Java lecture here, I promise. We are only looking at enough coding that will get us to a point where we can beautify our marketing page. And taking this from the first example, you'll see that the first example was talking about capturing audience with a good SEO landing page. Now we are talking about, now that you captured the audience, how do you keep the engagement for those people who are on your site? So that's why the course design or the landing page, it's really important to make it as attractive as you can. And of course, with the use of generative AI, you're trying to make the process easier for everyone. So basic example, I need a button for my course page. Now, maybe your software already provides it, or maybe there's one of the tools where you are thinking about adding a button for resources anywhere on your website. Now for that, I started out with the basic prompt where I said, good afternoon. I wanted to be nice. I wanted to be, to coax its ego, if you will. So I wanted to say, good afternoon, please create a button for a web page. Fair enough, right? It's a reasonable, humanly understandable prompt. And when I pasted this into my system, this is the output I got. I'm not going to go ahead and explain it at this point. That's, again, don't want to scare you all away. But it generated a series of output, a code, an HTML code that I then added it to my website. And look what I got. I got a series of code right there and a button. And the button, I don't know how you feel about it, but this does look like it's not inviting. I don't feel like clicking it. It looks like a phishing page or something. It is a button, but it's probably not a button that I would click. Let's leave it at that point. So that's my initial attempt at coming up with a prompt. Then what I did is I went through another example. This time I added a little more finesse to my prompt. I could have started with good afternoon since I already wished the ChatGPT. I didn't want to repeat it. I didn't want to irritate it. So I said, all right, given I've already wished you, let's get into the meat of it. I said, act as a web developer. Back to our first example, assign a role. And then I was very specific about what I need, which is I need a code. But then I also said, I gave a little more context to that request. I said, it needs to work with a VCBig editor. And I said, I want a blue button because I figured if I don't give it, it's probably going to be more creative than I want it to be and give me an ash colored button. So I said, give me a blue button with a white font and rounded corners. So I'm more descriptive with this. I gave it a role, I'm more descriptive, and then I gave context to why I need that particular action. So these are the three key things I've added in this prompt. That's the output. Now when I paste this output, this looks a little more appealing to me. Even on a afternoon with my cup of tea right here, I do feel like this is the kind of button I might click and see what's going on with that. So this is what you get once I've given a little more context, role, purpose to my activity. Now, if you compare this with my initial one, you see the difference between the two outputs. Both were intended for a purpose, but once you give a role, context, purpose, you're actually going to get a different output. So that's why we usually use the terminology. There's a difference between a prompt and a good prompt. Always, ChatGPT will give you what you want, but does it actually give you what you want? Will really depend on how you're prompting it and what data you're giving it for that output. I'm definitely going to click the right one. Not now, after the meeting. Okay, so the next example, now my goal is I have a landing page and I'd like to define 3 blocks of images where I'm probably going to talk about my rheumatoid arthritis courses. So say I have a series of 5 or 3 courses that are being planned by medical director, and he or she wants me to have a nice looking landing page where we're going to market 3 of those courses. And of course, I want those pages to be visually appealing. So I want to use imagery on that. I'm not an HTML developer, but I do want to use generative AI to see if it's going to help me with designing a page that's going to give me a nice looking image structure. So I move on. By now, I've learned a little bit more about what ChatGPT likes to see. So I've moved on with the same set of rules. I said, act as a web developer using an WYSIWYG editor. And then I said, write an inline HTML to create a basic code for the following type of page. So now I've given it a role, I've given it context, and now I'm getting into specifics about what that page should contain. I said 3 tables in the same row, stacked up, slightly shadowed background for each table, and the height that can include a picture as well as a text. So the important thing here, as you may notice, is your use case might be different from what I've tried to use here, but surely when you're thinking about your use case, you can describe it to a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old. The way you describe it is probably how you would like to write it in the prompt with enough information for it. Now, a rule of thumb for some of you who probably dabbled in ChatGPT or any Gen AI tool, there's no magic way to write a perfect prompt in the first pass. We're not even going to profess to be experts. The important piece is just learning as you do. As you learn the 5th prompt, you're probably looking at what did I learn from the first 4 prompts? How could I do better with the 5th prompt? And maybe your 5th prompt isn't good either. That's okay. Nobody's looking at a prompt generation competition here. As long as you get the output that you need, you should be good. So always think about this more as a conversation you have rather than a prescription as to what you should or you should not have. This is more towards just the basic framework that will help you get to, a good result as soon as possible. All right, we got the HTML output, and then this is what that tool has generated. As you can see here, it generated 3 blocks of content, and then it added a couple of more lines underneath that. So hopefully a good start. And then I start improvising this further with more prompting. So here what I did is I further added prompts for coming up with images. My friend Andrew, who has worked a lot on this, he's a lot into robot-based images. So that was his theme when he was working with imagery. So he generated 3 images. And as you can see here, you can have different variations of images using generative AI, which is beyond the scope of this session. But just so you know, you can actually have different kinds of image generation tools that will at least give you to at least a first or second start to image generation. At this point, I do want to reiterate what Danielle has mentioned earlier. Some of you may have access to dedicated marketing team or at least some form of a marketing resource. So this particular thing are things maybe they're already doing, or maybe they have advanced tools that they're able to leverage. But even if you have a 0.25 FTE allocated for marketing, surely with some generative AI, you would be able to design better looking landing pages, even with a finite marketing resource. And the hope behind these examples is hopefully not getting disheartened if you don't have a dedicated marketing resource, but at least do the best with what is available to you in terms of resources. And surely you probably would have realized by now, the output that you're getting is better than what a person would have done with a 0.25 FTE, because there's only so many things a CME coordinator can do. But with this, hopefully you're giving them a leg up in their review process. All right, let's take one more example. This one is slightly a longer version where I'm going through a sequence of steps. My goal here is I need to come up with a social media post for an upcoming activity. Now, what I did here is, for this particular example, it's fairly broad and generic, and it can have different kinds of interpretations. Instead of me trying to figure out the best prompt, what we try to do here is we try to ask ChatGPT what it likes to see in a prompt. So that's an interesting way of prompting, where what you're asking it to do is act like a prompt engineer and help me write a prompt on how to make a social media post for Facebook with SEO in mind. Tell me what you need to know to provide the post image and description. So we've redacted a portion of it, but the point here is prompt to prompt. You're prompting ChatGPT to give you what it needs for a good prompt. And as a general use case, we've seen this particular line of prompting would work really well if you have a pretty broad use case and there could be multiple interpretations of what output needs to come up with. So you'll see what I mean when I look through its prompt response. It gave me 6 elements or 6 portions that it needs to generate a social media post. Unsurprisingly, purpose of the post is the first one. It does require purpose, target audience, key message, what visual elements we need, what is the content, and then any additional elements. And if you review some of these things with what we've described in the first 2 examples, you see how the crux of a good prompt will carry over. You have to have a purpose. You need to tell it, the target audience or who is consuming that particular piece of content. What is your message? Describe specifically what you want to add in the output. So this actually reiterates what we learned in the first 2 examples. These are some of the things that ChatGPT would appreciate so that it could give you a better output, so to speak. So what I used in the next step is I've used this information and then I prompted it, giving what it needs, like, feeding it what it really wants. So here I said, this is the purpose of the post. This will be an advertisement for an upcoming live webinar, which is on July 22nd. And target audience, unsurprisingly, it's for anyone who wants to learn about robots. And then I've given a bunch of other things that go along with all the 6 sections. For brevity purposes, we've just added a couple of sections. In my actual prompt, I did add all the 4 sections. And then what it gave me is an output here. Actually, let me see if I can get to the previous one. Here we go. So it gave me an output. As I said, it generated an image because I specifically said in my output, I do want an image. And then I wanted a text here that goes along with it. And then a register now with the link. So that was my first pass with the prompt output. And surely enough, it's a reasonable start. It did start off with some good text. And I think it's a pretty reasonable one for the first iteration of a prompt. Let's move on. Let's see if we can make this even better with a better prompt. So here now what I said is I said, act like a web designer. And then I said, make this HTML more engaging. Now, I intentionally did not get into defining what engaging is, because this is where you want to think about what kind of task is ChatGPT doing. Is it more on the creative front or is it more analytical front? If it's more analytical, you want to describe it so that it's not putting in its own creative cap. If it's truly more art-based or more visual or more thought process-based copy, you probably want to just keep it at a high level. Just say engaging, see what it comes up with, and then keep iterating on what it comes back with. So that's why I intentionally kept it at that level. But then I also said my purpose, I want to include this for different email clients with accessibility, and I want to use it for a Facebook banner image in a WYSIWYG editor. So I gave it the context, still hopefully allowed it to be creative by keeping the instructions to an abstract level. That's the output that I got, at least a portion of the output. And then this was my text before I used any of the Gen AI tools. And this is what I get after using Gen AI. And as you can see here, light and day difference. I profess I'm not good in creative writing. My daughter hopefully is. She started writing. Maybe I learned it from her, but I'm not super good at it. So my hope really here is at least it gave me a copy that would have been better if I just took its help rather than writing it by myself. So whether you end up using this as is, whether you take this one step further, use it in some of your tools, that's totally up to your context. The purpose here is to let you know, or at least give you a flavor of what are the things that you can achieve with some basic prompting. All right. With that example, we will now move on to our second use case. As we're going through the second use case, a quick reminder, please punch in your questions, comments, feedback, any kind of feedback we appreciate. Love to learn more about how you've used marketing tools, success, lessons learned, any kind of feedback. Love to see them coming through the chat. All right, we now move on to another interesting area for generative AI, specifically outcomes reporting. And with this, I will pass it on to Anne, who is an expert in this.
I hope I'm getting there, Raja. So thank you. That was really a great enlightening presentation on marketing. So outcomes reporting. Where I am is, so MD Anderson, we are also an extra large program. We are jointly accredited, about 170 RSSs, 45 live activities. We also do the logistics and planning for some of these, that what we call a service that's available to some departments who need to enlist that kind of help. And we do have a good sized department that, fortunately for me, is able to support all of the breadth of what we want to do. And we have about 10 enduring activities. So where this news case came from was actually a situation that I brought to Raja. And because we are on a different learning platform than what Raja is affiliated and associated with, and we opted to really tailor our evaluation instrument. In doing so, we were able to get that front end to work, and then the data comes through, but then it doesn't get integrated into an automatic report that is standardized. And so and this was all part in the past 3 years because we launched a new learning management system. And in this, I was kind of talking and brainstorming with Raja just from our relationship of working together in the past to kind of say, these are my pain points. What are you thinking? And out of this came this thought of, wow, we have all of these different components here. It's such an important component, right? We all have to evaluate. We all have to demonstrate as part of accreditation, evaluation, intent to change, all of these key pieces. We also have many platforms that exist out there: SurveyMonkey, Red Cat, Qualtrics, all of these different things that can generate these reports. And where this is coming from a use case perspective is, it got to a point where we have so many of these instruments. One, it's one thing to have them in these results. The other thing is there any way to summarize them in a way that is consumable, digestible in a very fast fashion? And it came to me that was just really what I'm needing is somewhat of an executive summary to a business report. That's really what it came down to. And how do I pull that together? A great example of this is all of the comments we asked for in our open text of what else can we add to future education? What can you give us any feedback to this? Give us an example of what you plan to implement when you walk away from this course. We want to ask you that based on this. Do you have anything that's going to trigger you to go and apply it? So all of these comments, how do you summarize that other than printing it all out, PDFing it, and handing it over to the stakeholder who you're working with and having them interpret it? So out of this, I kind of looked at it and I said, what are the components that I need to communicate in what I would like to call this outcomes report or this executive summary? And 1 through 4 are all the things in our traditional CE applications. We need to gather this information anyway. It already exists. The components of 5 through 9 are data points that are going to come out of our evaluations. And how do I pull that into a summary other than handing over, this is the, here's your N, here's your average, here's your standard deviation. But how does that all come together based on what we were intending to do with those educational objectives we were trying to achieve? So this is how it kind of came about. And I think one of the questions that was asked in the chat was, what specific AI tools are you using? I've experimented this with ChatGPT, the free version, and the paid version. And I've also experimented with this with Claude, the free version and the paid version. And ChatGPT, in my experience, has given us so much data. It's advancing so quickly that it really is able to do some of the generic tasks that I'm asking for here without the paid version. And I would kind of say the same with Claude. In here, so what you see here are essentially the sections to this report. And within there is where I'm actually using the most AI, that is where I rely on AI the most. And those are components 5 through 9 in measuring that. Next slide, please, Raja. So a quick reminder and something to really be cognizant of when you go to do this. Please, first and foremost, check with your institutional policies on how this data, how you're using your data and where you're putting this type of proprietary data. My approach to this is I generalize it to such a degree that I'm really using it to aggregate information, not to do it in the form of research and studies. It's just a tool for me to move through this quickly and have something much more sophisticated handle it much better and much faster in the way of it's much more elegant in how it puts things together, but then it's also doing very quick analyzation. So when it comes to de-identifying, the most obvious things that come to mind is like, of course, we're going to take out any individual identifiers such as names, email addresses, down to IP addresses. I'm strictly going in and saying change in confidence, let's say, and I have a question of change in confidence before on a Likert scale, change in confidence after on a Likert scale, and that is the only thing in the spreadsheet that I put in, as well as I take it to one step further, and I actually create a new Excel file just from the raw data to ensure I'm not accidentally uploading the original raw data. And then secondarily, I even de-identify by not referencing any of the activity names. I'm not referencing or mentioning my organization at all in any of this, strictly the question, strictly the data that comes out to it. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Raja to help us kind of walk through the rest.
Great, thanks, Anne. And I could also talk through Anne's meticulous de-identification process. I was thinking about exactly all the things that she did, but I figured that the 4 words I could add is literally that. All forms of de-identification have been removed, and literally the kind of columns are more towards really what is needed for the ChatGPT to give us what we need, not the other way around. We don't want to feed everything and then accidentally have, private data added. We took the other way around. She gave me just like 3 or 4 columns. We just kind of worked with those 3 or 4 columns literally to say, what can we get with that minimalistic data that we are feeding into the Gen AI tool? And then, of course, as needed, we would add more, but the goal is being more parsimonious about what data you're feeding in and not the other way around. And I did want to call that out just to be sure that this is an area where the scope for error is high. The risk is also high if you're accidentally feeding in data. If your organization has a private version or a version where it's not going to train the model, definitely still ask your IT, data, privacy, AI teams to be sure that that's approved before you move on to the next step. With those disclosures, I think we've given enough of disclosures at this point. So we will then move on. The way we try to analyze the things there are like 9 actions that are available or 9 parts to the document. We want to start off with the most common use case. So today we are going to talk about the evaluation analysis of the open text responses. In terms of our future projects, we will touch upon the quiz pre and post test and some of those examples. Given we have a finite time today, we will get a little bit deeper into that open text responses and how we've used ChatGPT with that. As we know, the 3 elements here are it's repeatable, you have to do that multiple times. If Anne has 170 courses, if she wants to do this, she has to repeat, she or someone from her team will have to do it 170 times. So the scope of the problem is fairly large. Two, something that is really important is it needs to be verifiable. So I always go back to a conversation that Kurt and I had in one of our other CME conferences. He actually made a great point in one of the presentations where he said, if you're not able to verify an AI output, you likely shouldn't be using it. You have to be the human in that process to be sure that you're able to attest to the authenticity and the truth in that output. Yes, it could be creative, but if you have no idea to verify what it is giving you, you probably shouldn't use generative AI for it. So we knew that whatever output we are going to get, Anne and her team will be reviewing it. They'll do some fact checking to make sure that, is it being super creative, hallucinating, or something else with the data. So there's definitely human in the process. And the third point is because it's repeatable, it's also time consuming because of the steps involved. And this is sort of a quasi lean Six Sigma approach to see, is this a good candidate for generative AI? Because you don't want to take a problem that's too small, where you're going to spend more time prompting and still having to work with the manual output. This problem to us seemed like a ripe scenario where you could get the benefits out of generative AI, but still have that human in the loop to move on and get the best output after. So those were the three things we tried to keep in mind. Then this is our problem statement, generate evaluation summary report. And it's a fairly elaborate prompt. I'll try to break it down into some of the things that we learned earlier, where we said, you are an expert in CME data analysis, giving it a role. We also said you're an expert. Doesn't hurt to coax its ego a little bit, as long as you're doing the other things as well. So you're doing that, and then you're saying specifically what you're going to do. Not saying this is the best prompt. It's just an initial version where we said, I'll provide you with a spreadsheet containing customer reviews about a course on some particular activity. And that activity is also not the exact title. It's on a topic. And I'm sure most CME providers would have something about, immunotherapy, something about opioid use. So that's the de-identification that we were talking about. It's fairly abstracted, if you will. And then I said, these are the things specifically that you'll need to do. You're tasked with providing an in-depth analysis of these learner evaluation records to uncover learner feedback, learner gaps, barriers to implementing changes prescribed in the activity. And then we went into a little more detail. We said, you have to generate a Word document, including 3 sections. And then we said, these are the 3 specific sections that need to be added. First, answer the question, are they satisfied, dissatisfied, or neutral about the course content? And then we also wanted to, again, do a little bit of cross-verification. So we said, provide relevant snippets to support your answer. And then we said, section 2, provide some 3 positive outcomes based on the learner feedback. And then again, relevant samples to support your answer. Always, wherever you can, give work to ChatGPT to make sure that it can substantiate its answers. It also helps it to kind of double check its answers, just like in our math classes. Even if you have done that or 2-digit multiplication 10 times, you have to do a double check before you come back for the 11th time. It's just those things. The tool is no different. You want it to double check its calculations or programming before it gets back to you with an answer. The third one is something that is interesting. We wanted it to give us some constructive feedback to the faculty. And this is probably where we wanted it to be a little creative, where it's going to take the raw feedback and make it sound a lot more, for lack of a better word, appealing, so that it's more presentable to the faculty. Because sometimes we all know the learner feedback, you may or may not want to directly share it with your faculty, especially if you want them to come back next year. So we do want to leverage the tool to make sure it can help us with that. So those were the 3 sections that we've given. And then the feedback, we've redacted some portions of it, but essentially what it's coming back with is the following. It said it came up with an overall sentiment analysis, and then it said the summary of sentiment is the following: neutral, positive, constructive. And then it has given me key feedback items about the specific areas. Now, the important thing is it has actually grouped it in these initiatives: leadership and initiative, commitment to quality care, establishment of specialized clinics. So the system, ChatGPT, it found out that those were the key themes in the positive feedback, and it came up with those terminology. Now, if you were specifically interested in certain themes, you would definitely add that in the prompt where you would say, summarize the sentiments in 3 key buckets, maybe intent to change, or knowledge, performance, all of those buckets. You can specifically mention those changes so that it knows that it's not going to look at 15 different themes. It's going to bundle it in one of those themes. Always add other bucket so that if it doesn't fall in all the 3 buckets, at least it can give you the data you need. Few things like that. So it gave me a little bit of an output. This is the one in the code is the actual output from the evaluation. And then it also did the interpretation, which I thought was pretty cool. And then it interpreted some of these things there. And then it also gave me the same thing for multiple variations of it. So before I move on, Anne or Danielle, did either of you have anything else to comment on what you saw, what you see here at this point before we move on?
I think you covered it quite well, Raja. Just to reiterate, not that we haven't said it so many times, but the prompt, the details of the prompt are so very important. And also, as Raja said, like some of the feedback that we get from our outcomes and our evaluations is feedback that is, as he put it, raw. And so just a reiteration that ChatGPT, similar to like using ChatGPT to assuage an email that may be difficult to send, a difficult message to send, you can do the same with generative AI. I don't want to say ChatGPT, but to answer a question, that is what NYU uses, and we have enterprise access that is paid for by the institution. But yes, you can use it to really soften some of the feedback and send that along to the faculty as well.
Wonderful. Thanks, Danielle. All right. Now that we got one level of feedback, we wanted to take it to the next level, which is trying to see something that we as CME CPD providers may not have enough time to do, which is there a trend in terms of feedback based on the learner's area of practice? Do physicians feel differently about my course compared to what nurses are feeling or compared to what physician assistants are feeling? So oftentimes we do want to get to that data depending on, again, how many activities you have. Are you an extra large provider, extra large? I don't know if there's a classification. I just came up with that. But depending on wherever you are, if you have enough resources, are you able to get to that level of analysis is a question always. So we went one step further. And here what we did is we added a little more of insight generation prompt here, where we said, can you reclassify this feedback based on the profession? Profession was one of the columns. So as a reminder, we've added 3 columns we fed 3 columns to the generative AI tool. One is the name, which is pretty generic, not name of the faculty, just name of the course, so to speak, opioid disorder, something like that. The second one was area of practice, physicians, nurse, physician assistants, etc. Third, the raw feedback that we received, which would be something like, do you have any feedback about the activity? Do you intend to change something as a part of this practice, as a part of this activity? And that specific area of questioning. So we added 3 columns as inputs to ChatGPT. So what we did here is we said, can you reclassify this feedback based on the profession? And we specifically said, this is column 2 of the Excel. And we'd like to learn more about the feedback from physicians, physician assistants, nurses, APRN, which was one of the categories. And then umbrella term for all the others, feedback from all the other professions can be bundled as others. So here what we did is, because we knew we had 15 areas of practice to focus on, we tried to get to a more meaningful one to start off with. And you can certainly customize this, add more details to it. But really hopefully the point behind this is getting into that deeper level insight generation with a follow-up prompt. So this was the prompt. And then in terms of the output, what was interesting is how it's classified it based on the instructions that we provided. So it said, yep, I am going to classify the feedback based on the professions. It listed out the professions just to be sure that it understood what I wanted it to understand. And then it said, this is the classified feedback by profession. And then it said for physicians, this is the feedback. And then these are the areas of improvement. Now, it did it for all the 5 sections that I mentioned, which is physicians, physician assistants, nurses, etc. And it also gave us like a recommendation because that is specifically what we wanted it to add. And then it said, specifically interpreted the prompt and then gave us some recommendations based off of it. So this one is in our opinion, like a basic use case. We are super motivated to take this further. So we will be working on improving this further. Going back to Anne's example, this is one portion of the executive summary report. We are also working on the pre versus post-test analysis, getting in important information from the other activity data that you might get from your LMS. The whole point behind this is once you get these, you can develop a series of prompts. And then for some of you who may have heard about GPTs, most of the Gen AI tools have some kind of a way to make that repeatable. So you would build all the prompts together and then hopefully use that as your first step to get to a certain point in the report. It's only going to be version 1, knowing Anne and her perfection. There's definitely going to be multiple steps where she's going to look at the data. She's probably going to analyze it. I know it. She's going to analyze it again, make sure it's making sense, and then use it to get to version 2, version 3, etc. But hopefully what we're doing with this is having her team not necessarily start with step 1, maybe step 3 in the 10-step process. So that's the hope. And so, like I said, this is probably an area where we'll probably continue our analyses, and happy to share some of these results in our upcoming few months, hopefully in the next Innovate Ed session, if Stanford is having another one. All right. So with that example, we'll quickly move on to key takeaways since we are approaching the end of the presentation. As we see here, Gen AI has multitude of use cases. How you adopt it is up to you. And then I think really the key takeaway is the balanced approach towards Gen AI. We can be too skeptical. We can be too optimistic. There's somewhere we call the zone of Gen AI where it's going to give you the meat of what you need, hopefully get you to step 3, step 4. Sometimes it might be step 7 in your 10-step process. Sometimes it's step 3. But hopefully some of these examples have given you that, I guess, some ammunition to at least get to a couple of steps in your process. And then the last one is leveraging the best of AI, definitely adhering to data privacy and organizational policies is the key to success. Anne or Danielle, anything else you wanted to add before we go back to Q&A?
Sure. I just close by saying that while I certainly was not the first adopter of utilizing generative AI in my day-to-day processes, I have already seen how valuable it really can be in reducing waste in our everyday processes. I think someone posted in the questions that one of their employees is out on leave and that they wouldn't be able to handle marketing without using generative AI. So there really is so much value in it. And I'm personally excited within my team to take that to the next level and begin utilizing it in a variety of new ways beyond what we're doing now.
Wonderful. Just checking to see if you have any other unanswered questions in the chat. I think we're doing good. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Anne. Thank you, Danielle. I hope everyone had a little bit of insight on how you could potentially use Gen AI, or maybe it re-emphasized what you're already doing. On behalf of all the faculty members, we'd like to thank Stanford team for giving us this opportunity to present today, and happy prompting. Until the next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.